Hi there and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tamara and I'm a psychologist from South Africa. Now today's video is something that I obviously didn't plan to release. I wasn't planning on putting out something like this, but it is important to jump on what people are speaking about and use the platform no matter how detached the subject matter is from our daily lives, because these types of things do happen behind closed doors. And it is important for people to come together and speak about this. It is very interesting that as we are so divided around the world with political issues and the coronavirus and all these types of things, these types of global issues that seem so detached and superficial can serve as a way to elevate consciousness and to help us think in context, try and put ourselves in people's shoes and have empathy, as well as to think about what is appropriate and not appropriate. So today's video will obviously be touching on the much debated and much spoken about Will Smith and Chris Rock saga from the Academy Awards. So just to put out a disclaimer, this video is not going to be forming any type of diagnostic feature, so there will be no diagnosing, and this video will purely form a speculative tentative analysis based on what we know and what's been put out in the public, just to elevate a bit of consciousness and think about it. So I've been looking at a couple of psychologist videos and articles analyzing the whole debacle, and I see that a lot of them have touched on what they speculate in terms of Will and Jada's relationship that they've been extremely public about. And I thought I'd add a different take based on what Will Smith has said himself in his autobiography, as well as his show, the series, The Best Shape of My Life. Now, it's important to use this stuff as, again, speculation, because we're going to infer based on past behavior what could have been going on, but that remains to be seen in terms of if he comes out and later explains what is going on in his mind. And why we're using this type of platform for this is for psychoeducation, to elevate consciousness, to help us think about our own selves and how we can try and be better in terms of self-love and loving other people and being kind to other people. So another disclaimer is just that this won't be a blaming video, as in was Chris Rock wrong or was Will Smith wrong, and rather separating behavior from people and saying, what do we think about this and what could be done instead, as well as the broader aspect of what happened with the Academy and the applause that happened during Will's acceptance speech. Okay, so for the first part of this video will be on the speculative analysis aspect, and the second will be about the reaction, the repair, and then what happened at the Academy, and then the statement made afterwards. So let's first start off with what actually happened. So what do we know with the facts? Is that Chris Rock was doing a stand-up section during the Oscars, and he started to make a comment about Jada Pinkett Smith's bald head, but it is a part of a medical condition, and it's not really known. Chris Rock hasn't come out and said if he was aware that it was a medical condition. And from that, Will is seen to be laughing at the joke initially. He looks over at Jada. Jada rolls her eyes and moves her body language from an exposed neck to a straight position. Will impulsively, he appears to be very impulsive in standing up and goes towards Chris Rock in quite a defiant stance and slaps him very hard that you can hear it, and storms back to his seat and starts to say, "Keep my wife's name out of your effing mouth." Chris Rock then responds and says, "It was a G.I. Jane joke." So then Will, he responds with the same, "Keep my wife's name out your bleeping mouth." Let's look at one of the questions that has been dominating a lot of popular media in terms of, was this staged? Now, is it possible for this to have been staged? If we put ourselves in the perspective of the viewer that believes that this could have been staged, one could infer that Will Smith was laughing. He's known as a very comedic, light-hearted, likable character who makes a lot of jokes. He was part of perhaps a skit. He was laughing, he got up, slapped somebody, and that was that. He went back, but it was a bit staged. However, when he returned to his seat, he was visibly really angry. His face was very flushed. The people around him, the actresses and actors around him, looked visibly shocked. There was a change in the atmosphere in the audience that, unless the Academy is in on it for whatever peculiar reason and told all these actors to do that, it could be highly unlikely. Secondly, if we look at body language. So I'm going to link a couple of videos in the description from body language experts and other psychologists that looked at the body language to try and infer what was going on. Before I link all that stuff and go into it, it is important to understand that Freud himself explained that the body cannot lie, that we verbally, if we try to tell a lie, our facial expressions, even if you train it a bit like in the military or you're a little bit sociopathic or things like that, your body language will give you away. So he had this famous quote that he said, "We leak the truth through every pore." So the body can't be totally in conjunction with a lie, with a verbal statement. It's actually completely against it. So let's look at the body language. So in the first instance, we have to look at Jada. So Jada had her neck exposed when she heard Chris Rock say Jada. So she was preparing, which a neck exposing suggests vulnerability. Think about it. The neck is an essential part of the human body. And when we have it exposed, it means we feel safe in some way. So to make someone feel vulnerable, we have to make them feel safe. He made the joke and she immediately covered the neck, straightened up, and looked forward. Will Smith was appearing to look like he was enjoying the joke when it was delivered. Looked at Jada, who looked visibly uncomfortable, and charged forward impulsively. It did not look like he thought it out. As he was going forward to Chris Rock stomped his foot on the ground. In the animal kingdom, that is done as a sign of dominance to assert one's own stance. And secondly, he did it in many forums in terms of the body language, is a way to prepare for a fight, for aggression. Then interestingly, what Chris Rock did after that was he pulled his arms behind his back. Now that Prince Charles, for example, he does that as an act of confidence when he's talking to people in the public. But in this instance, it seemed as though Chris Rock was preparing to not engage in an argument. So when someone, will bring us into a fight, we will either defend or we will surrender. So it seemed as though from Chris Rock's body language that he was not going to partake in any type of aggression. So imagine putting your arms behind your back does not allow you to defend yourself. It is total act of surrender and vulnerability. So imagine someone coming towards you and you're pulling your arms behind yourself. It's almost a way of protecting oneself to not engage in aggression. So that is those analyses in terms of body language. Now we will start the speculative analysis on Will Smith and his impulsive and apparent and non-self-regulating behavior prior to assaulting Chris Rock and then verbally shouting at him. So prior to that, I'm going to read some excerpts from Will Smith's autobiography entitled Will. So these words are in his own words. They're not reframed or paraphrased. I've always thought of myself as a coward. Most of my memories of my childhood involve me being afraid in some way. Afraid of other kids, afraid of being hurt or embarrassed, afraid of being seen as weak. When I was 9 years old, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of her head so hard she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am today. Everything that I have done since then, awards, accolades, spotlight, and attention, the characters and the laughs, there have been subtle strings of apologies to my mother for my inaction that day, for being a coward. What you understand as Will Smith, alien annihilating, MC, the bigger-than-life movie star, is largely a construction, a carefully crafted and honed character designed to protect myself, to hide myself from the world, to hide the coward. Daddy-O was brilliant. Daddy-O was his father. Like many sons, I worship my father. But he terrified me. He was one of the greatest blessings of my life and one of my greatest sources of pain. My story was different from the ones being told by young black men. In their minds, I was somehow an illegitimate artist. They would call me soft, corny, a bubblegum rapper, criticisms that violently infuriated me. Looking back, I realize I may have been projecting a little. But the reason I hated it so much was that they were unknowingly poking at the thing I hated most about myself, my sense that I was actually a coward. Everyone in my house could fight, except for me. I took extra special care to please my father every chance I got. Harry turned out to be strong too. He preferred to just stand up and take the beatings. All along, Harry's courage, the fact that my little brother was able to stand up to the monster, just reinforced my shame. In a family of fighters, I was the weak one. I was the coward. I was the entertainer in the family. I wanted to keep everything light and fun and joyful. My 9-year-old brain processed Daddy-O's abusive episodes as somehow being my fault. I should have been able to keep my father satisfied. I should have been able to protect my mother. That night in the bedroom, at only 9 years old, watching the destruction of my family, as my mother collapsed to the floor, in that moment I decided. I made a silent promise to my mother, to my family, to myself. One day I would be in charge, and this would never happen again. As a child, I told myself that if I kept Daddy-O entertained and made him laugh, then he wouldn't hurt my mother. But that fantasy only caused me to feel like a coward, an unworthy son, despite the fact that none of it was my fault. My fantasy life, while in some ways protecting me, also caused me to feel more guilt and shame and more self-loathing. So now we're going to add in some excerpts from Will Smith's latest YouTube series entitled Best Shape of My Life, where he highlights not only his weight loss journey, but together with the writing process for his autobiography, with a whole bunch of key figures and characters in his life that shaped the trajectory of his whole life journey, and also the assistance of a psychologist called Dr. Romani. So here are some of the excerpts. The first two are from Dr. Romani, clinical psychologist. Will derives his sense of self from always succeeding and being well liked. The need to feel like I'm going to be loved. For Will, goals are everything. It's clear that came a lot from his childhood, where Will really had the sense, if I've got to work, I've got to succeed. He has to win completely, to stay safe, to stay in control. One of the challenges, though, is control is always an illusion. End of quote. Now through Will Smith. I began to refer to my nice guy persona as Uncle Fluffy. He was the pleaser in me, the part of me that had to smile, no matter how I was feeling. He wasn't allowed to be in a bad mood or have a bad day. But Uncle Fluffy was further complicated by his shadow counterpart, the General. When I didn't get the approval I sought, my anguish would express itself as the General. The General's job was to get the flag to the top of the hill by any means necessary and to punish those who dared to dissent, even myself. Uncle Fluffy was born as my strategic childhood persona. If I was funny enough, sweet enough, harmless enough, entertaining enough, then I wouldn't be hurt. Fluffy wants to be approved of. It's the only safety he can conceive. But Uncle Fluffy is masking my true feelings. Uncle Fluffy and the General weave a universe in which I am trapped. The question is, can I ever be free? Now that we have some of these analyses where Will Smith has come forward in a very vulnerable way in his autobiography, as well as in the YouTube series, where he describes two key parts within himself that he's had from childhood and a core wound, which we all have, by the way, is we all have childhood wounds from the past, and our desire to become conscious of these things and work on them daily, every single day, will then draw a testament to how we treat ourselves and other people. So he's drawn two distinctions: the Uncle Fluffy, likable, funny, crowd pleaser persona, which originated in his childhood home in a very abusive environment in which he internalized that he's the coward. He is the one that's not strong enough to fight off his dad. Now remember that this is an internal representation. It doesn't mean that it's real, but for Will Smith it is real, and it was real. And as a counterpart, he has that general, that harsh, militant person, which possibly could be an introject from his father's militant personality, who took no prisoners. So when he says at the end of this excerpt that will he ever be free of these two sides, that the Fluffy, Uncle Fluffy, protects him from this chaotic world and this need to be liked, is the general is the critical component, the part of him that needs to protect his family, is we sometimes are trapped in our own introjects of what we see ourselves from our core wounds in the past. And it's important to use this for us to elevate our consciousness and say, how can I be better, kinder to myself and to other people? So if we analyze the night of the Oscars, if we can see immediately that Will Smith laughs at Chris Rock's joke, and that we could infer, suggest, or speculate that it is this Uncle Fluffy, likable, external persona that protects him initially, that he's referenced in his book, as well as in the series, Uncle Fluffy. That's the Will Smith that he himself has spoken about, that he created to protect himself. But immediately when he looks to Jada and he sees that she is not okay, his mind goes back to 9-year-old Will when he was defenseless, and he goes back to, am I really this coward? Am I really going to watch my symbolic female figure in my life that represents an old childhood wound of a mother figure? Am I really not going to do anything about that? So what happens? He switches from Uncle Fluffy to the general, and the general doesn't take prisoners, as we've said. That could explain. Remember this, we are probably analyzing, we're looking at a probable analysis, is that he didn't have time to regulate. It's so instinctual to go back to those core wounds and to go back to that part of us that is so primitive and defenseless, that goes into that aspect of protection, self and others. So that could explain between Uncle Fluffy, the laughing, and he looks at Jada, sees she's not upset, and he protects. Because remember, when he's 9 years old, he believes he's defenseless. How is he going to protect his mother if he feels he can't? So he's got that internal battle of, I'm a coward, and going back to the general. And that's where you see that instinctual, I need to do something about this. So now that we've had a look at an analysis of what possibly could have been going through Will Smith's mind to have impulsively acted and stopped himself from self-regulating before doing something, we need to also be very self-reflective that all of us have this aspect in ourselves that we need to be mindful of, is that hurt people hurt other people, is that we all have from childhood core wounds that we need to be very, very, very mindful of and work on it daily. The more aware and the more conscious we are of this, the better it is for our self-love and love for others. However, we need to separate man from behavior, because we are basically good, we're born good, but we have bad behavior that it needs to be called out on, it needs to be held accountable. And so we have a couple of questions in the aftermath of what happened from the night that we need to think about. The first is, why did the Academy not intervene immediately? So what I noticed as a viewer after, because I didn't watch it immediately, is that he wasn't removed immediately. Chris Rock seemed to be quite defenseless. He had to just kind of collect himself and continue. So this week, the Academy, the board, said the following. Smith's actions included inappropriate physical contact, abusive or threatening behavior, and compromising the integrity of the Academy. Mr. Smith's actions at the 94th Oscars were a deeply shocking, traumatic event to witness, in person and on television. The statement continued. Mr. Rock, we apologize to you for what you experienced on our stage and thank you for your resilience in that moment. We apologize to our nominees, guests, and viewers for what transpired during what should have been a celebratory event, the statement said. So some of the questions we need to think about as a society is, why did the crowd give Will Smith a standing ovation during his acceptance speech during the Oscars after he had assaulted a man and verbally abused him, where he was clearly very aggressive and assaulting? Was his performance really good in the film? Is he a beloved actor, and does that help you rise above bad behavior? Those are the types of things we as a society need to think about. Okay, also looking at, we got to separate the man from the behavior. There is a difference between being empathic and being enabling, as in we can have empathy that people come from a terrible background and people have overcome terrible hardships, but it doesn't mean that we can give them a whole pass to just do whatever they want and hurt people because they themselves are carrying something deep inside. We all have to be accountable for what we do and not who we are. Another healthy aspect to speak about is that anger is part of our normal healthy emotions and that they do need to be expressed. All our emotions need to be expressed, but in a channel that is healthy. So how could Will have expressed anger in a healthy way? Was, for example, through his platform, through regulating, through thinking. Another aspect that we need to think about is that during Will's acceptance speech, he said, "Love will make you do crazy things." Now, this is quite a dangerous narrative for us to think about because it suggests an external locus of control, which means I am not accountable for my actions. Love or God or evil things in the world make me do certain things, and that is simply not true. We as human beings need to take responsibility to introspect and look at what happened to us in childhood, what wounds am I carrying, which we all carry, and how can I try and be a little bit more conscious today and tomorrow to myself and other people. So that love will make you do crazy things can be sometimes used as a little bit of an excuse to say that I will protect my family at all costs, but we need to hold ourselves accountable to limits. So that could possibly send a wrong message, which I'm a bit concerned about and that we need to speak about. So this video hopefully did not fall into a demonizing or blaming in terms of finding who's right, who's wrong. It's more about looking contextually about how things could be handled better, how things could be looked at in terms of how we react to things, how we see things, how we relate to ourselves and other people. So what I would like to put out for people to think about and maybe comment either below in the comments on this channel or through Instagram is, how do you think Will Smith could have shown anger in a more appropriate way? So a lot of people think that the joke was pretty tame in terms of Jada, but we have to have empathy that if she was offended, she was offended. Is that we have to give that, a plausible outcome. But if he was angry, how could he have found a way that appropriately could have expressed that anger without assaulting or hurting or causing a huge commotion and hurting somebody else? I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this helps just to try and help us to think a little bit more consciously about ourselves, in our systems, and on our planet. All the best.